Over the past few decades, investigators, scientists, and regular people have been using the internet to help solve more and more mysteries. Online information can help to swiftly apprehend someone shortly after a crime, or solve a decades-old mystery that has faded into obscurity. Number 10. For almost a decade, one of the most mysterious unsolved codes was one that came from a secret pocket in a Victorian-era dress. It wasn't until December 2023 that codebreakers finally cracked the silk dress cipher. The saga began in February 2014 when Sarah Rivers Coalfield made a blog post about a vintage dress she had bought. Sarah's blog focused on historical clothing, so most of the posts focused on the bronze-colored fabric, the detailed buttons, and alterations that had been made. But the most interesting part of the post was what was found inside the dress. In a hidden pocket that would have been inaccessible while wearing the dress, Sarah found 2 balls of paper. They looked as if they'd gone through the laundry, but it was possible to smooth out the paper and read what had been written. The writing didn't make much sense. Each line seemed to be made up of a random selection of words that didn't fit together. The writer had also made a note of how many words each line contained. Examples included Bismarck, omit leafage, buck bank, Cairo, rural, lining New Johnson, none ice, and Calgary, Cuba, unguard, confute, duck Fagan. There seemed to be some patterns, with the 3rd or 4th word in each line often beginning with the letter L, or the word noun, repeated in multiple lines. But that didn't provide much of an explanation to Sarah. Almost immediately, her post created intrigue, with cryptography experts keen to try to solve the mystery. Some theorized that this might have had something to do with the Civil War, given the time period, and just how well hidden the notes were. Another early guess was that this was some kind of telegraphic code. At the time, each word in a telegraph message could cost multiple dollars, which would quickly add up for anybody who needed to send multiple messages. So codes were created that would use one word to convey an entire sentence. Internet sleuths seeking the content of the silk dress cipher's telegraph messages were aided by Wayne Chan. After reviewing 170 code books without success, Chan found an answer in a book. The code matches those used for weather by the US Army Signal Corps. The weather codes began with a location, usually in the US or Canada, but occasionally as far as Egypt or Malaysia, which could still be areas of US Army interest. Chan then located an 1892 weather codebook. The codes used individual letters to convey information on temperature, pressure, dew point, precipitation, wind direction, cloud observations, and more, with the meaning depending on the letter's position. For example, Bismarck, omit leafage, buck bank, described Bismarck's weather as 56 degrees, 30.08 pressure, 32-degree dew point, clear day, no precipitation, north wind, clear sunset, and 12-mile-per-hour wind velocity. While less exciting than a Civil War message, the discovery was still fascinating. Number 9. In December of 1966, a teenage boy discovered the remains of a woman in some underbrush in Tiburon, California. It would take almost 60 years for the mystery of the woman's identity to be solved. But even now, exactly how she ended up there remains unknown. The woman was given the name Marin County Jane Doe as investigators tried to determine her identity. She was found wearing a red cotton dress, an off-white trench coat, a white loafer, and Westclock's wristwatch. Nobody in the local area had any idea who she was. The best that could be found was a fireman who claimed to have seen her some months before she was discovered. The firefighter claimed that 3 months earlier, the woman had arrived at the Trestle Glen fire station. She said she had no money for a taxi and asked if she could spend the night in the fire station. He refused. She then asked if she could borrow his car, which he also refused. The woman wandered off, never to be seen again. Later, the fireman called the police to inform them of the strange woman, but no trace of her could be found. An examination of the woman's remains determined that it had been shortly after this that the Jane Doe lost her life. How this happened could not be determined. At around the same time, Dorothy Valancourt stopped answering calls from her children. Dorothy was a mother of 7 and in her late 40s at the time of the disappearance. She'd been born in Australia and served as a nurse during the war. It was then that she met her future husband, a U.S. Marine who was on leave. They married, and after the war, she moved to the U.S. with him. They had several children, including daughter Penelope. Around 1960, Dorothy and her husband divorced. She struggled with alcohol, and the children moved between orphanages and the care of their parents. In 1964, she married a German man named Hermann Hesse. Not much is known about Hesse, but according to Penelope, he claimed to have fought for Germany during the war. He was a violent man who was at one point arrested for trying to hurt his stepdaughter. The children were moved back to live with their father while Dorothy remained in Hesse. Dorothy remained in touch with her children, but in late 1966, all contact with her ended. She disappeared from San Francisco, and nobody was aware of what happened to her. Nobody made the connection with the Jane Doe found in Marin County a few months later. Penelope never stopped wondering what happened to her mother. It was a mystery she wanted to solve, but not one that she was trying to solve when the answer finally arrived. After retiring, she signed up for an ancestry website to find out more about her family tree. They offered a DNA sharing service, which Penelope signed up for. A few months later, on the 58th anniversary of the Marin County Jane Doe's discovery, she was given shocking news. Her DNA had matched that of the Jane Doe, which the local police had sent to a forensic lab in 2022. The discovery confirmed she was Dorothy Valancourt. Number 8. Carrie Mae Parker was just 23 years old when she vanished without a trace in 1991. She left behind 3 children under the age of 6 and a family who were baffled by her disappearance. It wasn't until 2021 when a YouTuber found her wrecked car that her case was finally solved. A disturbing number of people are eventually found at the bottom of lakes and rivers. When someone disappears with their vehicle and no clear motive, bodies of water along that route are often the first place checked. But these can be deep and the water unclear, making it difficult for law enforcement to thoroughly check all waterways. In recent years, groups of divers have taken cold cases, with many sharing these experiences on YouTube. In December of 2020, Carrie's daughter Brandy reached out to one of these groups, Adventures with Purpose. Brandy had only been 5 when her mother disappeared. The last time she'd heard from her mother, Carrie had been making preparations for her son's birthday. He was turning 6, and she planned on buying him a bike. She'd left in her blue 1980 Buick Skylark from their home in Quinlan, Texas, but she never returned home. Carrie's children were led to believe she abandoned her family. Relatives tried to report her missing to law enforcement, but there were problems getting the missing person report filed. One report was never submitted, while another was classified as only a welfare check. Together, that meant it was decades before a proper investigation into Carrie's disappearance got underway. By this point, there were few clues to follow. Some suspected Carrie's ex-boyfriend may have been behind her disappearance. There were claims he'd been digging holes on the grounds of his family's septic business, but there was little evidence he had anything to do with the disappearance. As Brandy learned more about her mother and the disappearance, she became certain that Carrie hadn't willingly disappeared. In 2021, the volunteer group Adventures with Purpose searched Lake Tawakoni for Carrie's car, which had vanished 20 years earlier on that route to her father's home. They located the badly deteriorated wreckage, confirmed as Carrie's, but they found no remains, only the bicycle that she had bought for her son. Her loved ones assumed she was in the car. Law enforcement searched the area after extraction, but they found nothing. The YouTube team returned, locating fragments of remains, including Carrie's necklace. DNA confirmed the remains were Carrie's in May of 2022, providing closure to her children by confirming her disappearance was a tragic accident, not abandonment. Number 7. There are few things more terrifying to imagine than waking up in a strange place with no memory of who you are or how you ended up there. That was the reality of a man who woke up in a Seattle park in 2009. It was only with the help of an internet article that the mystery would become partially resolved. The man woke up in Discovery Park on July 30th, 2009. He was wearing neat clothing, including pressed khaki pants, and had $600 hidden in his sock. But he only had vague memories of sitting in the park for the past few days, and had no idea who he was or how he had gotten there. He flagged down a bus driver who contacted the authorities, and the man was taken to a local hospital. He started going by the name John Doe, while hospital staff tried to figure out what had happened to him. John had some kind of amnesia, but examinations showed no signs of any physical trauma. Instead, the mystery seemed to be the result of a rare case of dissociative amnesia. He began to recall random memories, but none were particularly clear and didn't seem to fit together. He remembered living in places like Paris, Shanghai, and Vienna, and studying at a few different US universities. But many of the memories John recalled were traumatic. He remembered a wife who'd passed away after a miscarriage. This was many years before he ended up in Discovery Park, and didn't seem to be the cause of his amnesia, but it may have had long-lasting consequences on his mental health. Local newspaper, the Seattle Times, covered John Doe's story. The story appeared on its website, where it reached news outlets in China. There, a British man recognized the photo of John Doe. He commented on the Seattle Times story, identifying him as Edward Lightheart, who'd lived in Xi'an in 2005. Other commenters soon started to do research into Lightheart. He was a very well-educated man who'd lived in all the different places John Doe remembered and studied the same universities. Lightheart was 53 years old at the time and lived a very interesting life. He had trained as a chef, studied French at university, and taught at an English school in China. The news story would eventually reach Lightheart's family and friends, including an estranged sister who lived in Las Vegas. According to the sister, Lightheart had lived with her for about a year and a half. He wanted to work abroad again and wasn't going to settle for a job in the local area. It frustrated her, as she wasn't helping to pay rent. Lightheart suddenly left in July, leaving behind all his belongings, including his computer. His sister claimed it wasn't unusual for Lightheart to leave her for 8 or 10 years at a time before coming back. Despite this, she tried to file a missing person report, but was unsuccessful. She also claimed that Lightheart had had emotional problems for a while. When given this information, John admitted that he was Lightheart, or at least he recognized the man in the photos of Lightheart as himself. But he couldn't remember any of the names or details he was being presented with. He knew that what he was being told was probably true, but he had no memory of it. Number 6. Most people, when exploring antique markets, might find some nice furniture or clothes from a time long past. But when Oliver Barnes noticed a small bag in the back corner of one store in Salisbury, England, he stumbled across a mystery that was just waiting to be solved. Barnes is a photography and camera enthusiast, so finding the vintage camera was an impressive enough discovery on its own. The camera was a #1 pocket Kodak, which was first produced in the 1920s. It uses 6x9cm negatives, with the relatively large size allowing photographers from 100 years ago the chance to capture scenes in striking detail for the time. Barnes is especially interested in film cameras, so he was excited to discover there was still film within this antique find. Not only that, but the film had been used. This meant he had potentially discovered photographs from 100 years ago. He took the film to a specialist for development. At first, he worried that exposing the film to daylight might have ruined whatever images had been captured. This type of film is highly sensitive to light, and many historical photos have been ruined in this way. Thankfully, Barnes's curiosity hadn't done any damage, and the film could be developed properly. The expert believed that the film was actually a kind that didn't go into production until the late 1950s. It was possible for photographers to take notes on this film, with dates and places often recorded alongside the negative. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case here. Barnes was left with captivating photos taken sometime around 1950, but no idea really where or when they'd been captured. 2 of the photos featured 2 graduates standing on a bridge and looking out into the distance. But the most intriguing photos were those that showed a crowd of people gathered on an otherwise ordinary street. Barnes shared the photos on Facebook in the hopes that someone might be able to solve the mystery. The street in the photo was recognized as a location in the village of Chipping Sodbury, outside the Portcullis Hotel. A war memorial in the center of the street confirmed that the images were taken after the Second World War. Across the street from the crowd of people, a news team seemed to be setting up a camera for filming. One commenter noted what looked like a chauffeur-driven car and suggested this may have been a royal visit of some kind, or possibly a visit from the mayor. Alternative suggestions included the possibility that the crowd had gathered to see an event by the American Army, who were stationed nearby. But there was no evidence for any of this in the historical record. The images went viral and even appeared in local BBC news reports. It wasn't long before the mystery was finally solved. In 1948, Margaret Good gave birth. Just the day before the delivery, she discovered she was carrying quadruplets. They were the first surviving quadruplets to be born by cesarean section, with all four healthy enough to come home just a few weeks later. According to one of the girls, they were unable to go anywhere without getting attention. It turned out that this attention began the day they were brought home, when a crowd of people gathered to welcome them to the community. This included film crews who captured the family arriving for the first time. The information solved the mystery of the two crowd photos, but there were still the unidentified men on the bridge. The location has been identified as St. Andrews in Scotland, but the men in the images are still a mystery. Number 5. The internet helps solve mysteries beyond just crimes. In 2004, a YouTube video aided scientists in solving a decades-old puzzle concerning euglenoids. These single-celled organisms, which both photosynthesize and consume organic matter, are ancient and pose a mystery about their placement at the base of the eukaryotic tree of life. The lack of euglenoid evidence in the fossil record was a major problem. Researchers suspected tiny rigid microfossils, previously misidentified as algae or fern spores, were actually euglenoid cysts, especially since they were abundant around mass extinction events, suggesting encystment was a survival mechanism. But this theory required proof of modern-day cyst formation. The necessary evidence appeared in a 2023 YouTube video entitled Euglena Encystment, a rarely seen event by Fabian Weston, which showed euglenoids forming cysts, likely due to the water on the microscope slide drying up. This video provided the exact proof scientists needed, confirming the microfossil's identity. Solving the mystery of these fossils was a crucial step in understanding euglenoids' place in the tree of life and their long-term survival. Number 4. Joanna Pekka was holding her baby son in her arms when someone came up to the car she was sitting in and took her life. It would take more than 3 years and a TikTok video before the person the police believed to be behind the crime was finally caught. The crime took place just after 5:30 p.m. on July 31st, 2021. Joanna was a 27-year-old mother of 2 who'd recently separated from her ex-boyfriend, Benjamin Williams. They had a son together who was only a few months old, and he texted Joanna to ask to meet at the Woodland Memorial Gardens Cemetery in St. Petersburg, Florida, so he could see the child. It was an odd request, but Williams' sister was buried in that same cemetery, so Joanna assumed this was just a convenient location for him. She pulled up to the location. Her 4-year-old son from a previous relationship was in the back seat of the car. Joanna had taken her baby from his seat and was holding him when someone came up to the window. Witnesses heard the sound of a weapon being fired, and they rushed to the scene. They found Joanna had been struck by multiple bullets, but neither of the children had been harmed. The person responsible fled from the scene before the police could arrive. The police searched for evidence of who could have committed such a horrifying crime. While looking through Joanna's phone, they soon discovered the text messages from Williams. He became their prime suspect, but he was already nowhere to be found. The case quickly attracted media attention. Joanna was described as a loving mother and a trusting person. According to her own mother, she loved to play with her children and had a smile that would be severely missed. A reward for information gradually raised as time went on, and the disturbing crime appeared in local news and the TV show In Pursuit with John Walsh a year after Joanna's passing. It was hoped that the added attention might finally bring a break in the case that the police needed. Williams was described as armed and dangerous. Joanna's family were especially scared as they were now looking after her children and worried that he might try to do something to them. Williams was also considered a person of interest in multiple other crimes, including cases where people had lost their lives. The details of these crimes were not shared by the authorities. Despite the appeals, there was no sign of the wanted man. Shortly after the incident, Jasmine Alexander covered it on her true crime TikTok account, where she shared local news coverage. The TikTok video was shared hundreds of times, but it wouldn't be until 2024 that it finally reached the person who would help crack the case. On November 27th, someone in Mexico watched Jasmine's TikTok. The video featured a photo of Williams. He had short hair and a beard, but the witness was sure the face resembled that of a man they knew. This man had dreadlocks, but they were sure it was the same person. The witness contacted the embassy in Mexico and alerted the authorities to the individual. He was arrested, and authorities confirmed this was Benjamin Williams. Williams was extradited to the US, and since his arrest there's been little updates on this case, and it seems it may still technically be unresolved. Number 3. The 1947 partition of India and Pakistan, overseen by a British lawyer in 36 days, caused chaos, leading to families and communities being split. Muhammad Shafi's family, from the village of Bullock, fled the turmoil. 10-year-old Muhammad was separated from his family, and he was adopted by a Sikh man named Mangal Singh, who named him Mahinder Singh Gill. For 77 years, Mahinder wondered about his family, who had settled safely in Pakistan. In 2024, researcher Nanika Datta, collecting her border stories in India, met Mahinder. She searched Bullock online and found a Pakistani YouTuber named Abbas Khan Lashari of the channel Sanjay Wele, who shared partition stories. Lashari's video featured two elderly men searching for their brother, lost during the partition. The details oddly matched Mahinder's story. Working with Lashari, Datta confirmed the connection. The two separated brothers, including one with significant vision and hearing loss, joyfully reunited via a Zoom call, calling Mahinder by the name Mahinder Safi. The brothers assured Mahinder that his separation was simply how things were meant to be. While the mystery was solved, persistent tensions between India and Pakistan made an in-person reunion difficult, though the family holds on to hope that one day they will be reunited. Number 2. The 2017 discovery and recovery of the de Kooning painting, Woman Ochre, was one of the biggest art crime stories of the past decade. But it also helped solve a more obscure mystery after an internet sleuth looked into some of the other paintings found at the site. When Rita Alter passed away, her nephew hired a company to clear out her home. It was filled with artwork that she and her husband Jerry had collected from a lifetime of travel. The company soon realized that one of the paintings, hidden behind a door in the couple's bedroom, was a famous missing painting, Woman Ochre. The painting was eventually returned to the museum, from which it had been stolen decades earlier. The discovery sparked interest in the true crime community, and documentaries were made about the crime and the mysterious couple who seemed to be behind it. After the discovery, the FBI examined the other artworks in the Alter home. They confirmed that none were on their stolen artworks database, and 3 pieces were sold at auction. But for one internet sleuth, this seemed strange. Lou Schachter had become fascinated with the Woman Ochre case after seeing its empty frame at the museum that it had been stolen from. He followed the case closely and wanted to know more about the Alter couple. He believed the pieces sold at auction might have been stolen too. The pieces included 2 paintings, which were sold as fall landscape, an Indian, and a war bonnet. Schachter found no record of thefts of paintings in those names. In fact, he couldn't find much information about the paintings at all. even though he knew the artists they were attributed to. He began to suspect they'd been sold under a different name. Using the Google Lens feature to do a reverse image search, Schachter found mentions of fall landscape on a poster website. There, the painting was listed as Aspens. Looking up Aspens by Victor Higgins took him to an art book on the Internet Archive, which revealed that the painting belonged to the Harwood Foundation in Taos. A search of old newspaper reports revealed that Aspens had been stolen from the art museum, as had another painting, Indian Boy in Full Dress, also known as Oklahoma Cheyenne. The artist, J.H. Sharp, was the same one who'd painted War Bonnet. Schachter checked the Harwood website for any trace of the paintings in their collection. They might have been recovered, but that didn't seem to be the case. He contacted the University of Mexico, which the Harwood Museum of Art is now a part of, and the official investigation into the paintings began. The university soon contacted the FBI, which took on the case. The theft in Taos had taken place in March of 1985, 9 years before a law was passed making stealing a cultural artifact from a museum or library a federal offense. That explained why the artwork had not appeared on the FBI's website. According to a newspaper report at the time, a man in a black raincoat had simply walked into the museum and taken them off the wall before walking out again. The simplicity of the crime resembled that of the Woman Ochre theft. The FBI were eventually able to track down those who'd purchased the two paintings at auction, and Aspens and Indian Boy in Full Dress, better known as Oklahoma Cheyenne, were returned to the Harwood Museum, bringing to a close a 40-year-old mystery. Number 1. On May 21st, 2016, a farmer in Green Bay, Wisconsin made a horrifying discovery. Lying in a wooded area on his land was the body of a young woman who had been brutally attacked. The body was soon linked to a missing person report that came in that same day, but cracking the case was not so simple. The body belonged to Nicole Vanderheiden, who was 31 years old at the time. Nicole was a mother of 3 children and remembered by friends and family as a light. The night before her body was found, Nicole had gone out with a group of friends and her boyfriend, Doug. Doug was the father of Nicole's youngest child, who was just a baby at the time. The group went to a bar called The Watering Hole, where they listened to live music. Nicole didn't normally drink, but this night seemed to be an exception, and she was having fun. Doug came across some old school friends and was still chatting with them when the original group decided to go to another bar. Doug said he would catch up after finishing his conversation, and Nicole went to the other bar. After about 15 minutes, Nicole started to get frustrated that Doug hadn't joined them. She sent multiple texts, and Doug eventually stopped responding. When another friend tried calling him, he immediately picked up, which only made Nicole angrier. At about 11:45 p.m., Nicole left the bar. A friend tried to get her to wait, but she refused, and she walked away alone. CCTV showed Doug and a friend arriving later, but by this time, Nicole and the rest of the group were gone. After driving back and forth for a while looking for Nicole, Doug's friend dropped him off at home. He let the babysitter leave, checked on his son, then went to bed. The next morning, there was no sign of Nicole. He assumed she'd stayed with friends, but when she still hadn't returned by that afternoon, Doug alerted the police. By this time, her body had already been found. Doug was initially the prime suspect. That suspicion seemed to be justified when evidence was found across the road from his home. There were signs of a struggle and evidence that someone had been significantly hurt. A neighbor also found a phone cord, which matched the bruises that were found on Nicole's neck. It seemed to be an open and shut case, but Fitbit data from the device Doug was wearing proved he couldn't have been responsible. It showed he remained at home after letting the babysitter go, and only recorded a dozen steps that night. DNA evidence found on Nicole's body also didn't match Doug. It belonged to an unknown male. It was submitted to police databases, and thankfully, a match was found. The DNA belonged to George Stephen Birch. A few weeks after Nicole's attack, Birch had been involved in a case involving a hit-and-run traffic incident. He'd given his phone to the police to prove his alibi, and they cloned the device as part of the investigation. The device gave the police in Nicole's case valuable information. It was attached to a Google account, Using Google's online dashboard, the police were able to trace Birch's movements that night. The online record showed him driving to Nicole's home on the night of the attack. He was there about 15 minutes before he drove to the location where her body was found. He then drove to a place where police found Nicole's belongings before he finally returned home. Birch admitted to driving Nicole home that night. They'd met at another bar and had flirted for a while. Outside her home, he claimed Doug had found them and attacked Nicole, then forced him to help hide her body. The DNA evidence, as well as Doug's Fitbit data, proved this wasn't true. Birch was found guilty of taking Nicole's life and sentenced to life in prison. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.